All right, we're live. We're going to try out some live streaming on YouTube for our vCluster office hours. And then the next one we'll probably get back to maybe either doing on multiple different channels, or maybe we'll do it on Zoom. That way we can do an invite and kind of send out some information and get a bunch of y'all in here to answer questions. Actually, let me change the song. There we go. All right, got some music in the background. All right, office hours for January 9th. So it's going to be interactive. If you're in here and you want to ask questions, or if you have questions just about vCluster, go ahead and post them in the chat. If you're watching this after the fact because you just wanted to catch it and you have questions and you weren't able to make it, just post in the comments and I'll try to either answer them or see if I can find somebody that can help answer them. But yeah, post in the comments. Let me know what you want to see in upcoming videos. We're going to be making some more videos about use cases and stuff like that. The one I'm working on right now is going to be related to preview environments. So I'll have a pretty easy example to start out with on the preview environments. I'll talk about how to deploy something based on our docs, and then we'll build on that over the next couple of weeks too. So like next week, I'll have a video and talking about how to deploy an application and do a preview environment off of a PR. But we'll talk about some GitHub we'll talk about GitHub Actions and how to get that stuff set up and walk through what we show in our docs, and then a little bit more. All right, let me go ahead and get into our slides. We don't have a ton of slides today. Just got a couple. I will go through and maybe present on vCluster until we got to. We'll see if we get that many people in. If we don't get a ton of people in and we don't get many questions or anything like that, I might just retry this again in the next couple of weeks and give people a bit more heads up about the office hours that's coming up. But new year, trying to get people back into work slowly. I know it's probably the first week back for everybody. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so your host. So it's just me today. Next time, I think we'll probably have more people. We'll probably have some events and different things set up, maybe some demos to kind of show off some of the new stuff coming in vCluster, some of the new stuff that just recently came out like we did last time in the office hours. But we want to get used to kind of having an office hours in a way to interact with the community and answer questions if you're not able to get them answered maybe through Slack or something like that. Pretty good. We have pretty good support in there that's kind of helping out with questions, but sometimes you might just want to ask something based off of something that you hear or see in a demo and while you're thinking about it. All right, so we're just gonna do an intro, which we're doing right now, and then we're just talking about vCluster and then like a Q&A and then a outro. So vCluster intro. Let's go ahead and I'll do the presentation that I usually do on our demo. And once we get through that, I'll go through and look at some of our docs and talk about some of the new features and what's coming up in the videos that we're making on this channel. All right, so vCluster, reduce Kubernetes cost and sprawl with virtual Kubernetes clusters. Introducing, for the first time ever, vCluster made by Loft Labs. Some of the stuff will get updated too. This is like slides from last year, so we want to see what Gartner says. Like in the next section, we want to see what Gartner says now. Like what are they projecting that spin's going to be in 2025, and how accurate were they in 2024? I believe that there was a ton, like if you went to KubeCon, there were a ton of vendors that were all about how do we reduce your AWS costs? How do we make you spend less and then use, automation to deploy and bid on the cheapest resources when you have these spot instances and stuff to deploy your Kubernetes clusters. That's going to save you some money. You could also pair it up with vCluster, and what you can do is when you're scaling up your worker nodes, you can also scale up and down your virtual clusters based on usage, right? So if you're already scaling that stuff, you can use vCluster to reduce the workloads by scaling down when your developers aren't actually doing anything with it. 70% of organizations identified over-provisioned Kubernetes as the leading cause for their surge in spend. Everybody's like, give me a cluster, I want a cluster, right? Like they hear about Kubernetes, they go to a conference, they're like, hey, give me a cluster, it can't be that expensive, right? It's a little bit expensive, right? Like you're giving everybody a 3-node cluster, gets pretty expensive pretty quick, right? So there's got to be a better way. You got to be able to actually, save some money. You got to be able to put everybody on a single cluster without just worrying about namespacing. We had Joyce posted a meme recently that was, like who deleted my app? And I was like, well, what was the name of it? My app. And where was it running? Default. And then, maybe another developer deployed the same demo app that you've got in your docs to kind of show users how to use Kubernetes, and they've either overwritten it or they've modified it, and the user's like, where's my app? It's gone because we're all working out of the same namespace. We didn't switch over to different namespaces and target those and actually make sure that our configuration was updated and deployed to that namespace. We didn't add it to our or YAML or even scope to it. It's very common. Give them a virtual cluster instead. Give them their own API. Give them the ability to create their own namespaces. Give them the ability to interact with it without anyone else interacting with it, right? Makes it a little bit easier. All right, so companies create a lot of Kubernetes clusters. So they create a separate cluster for every team, for every customer, for every environment. And that's hundreds of clusters, right? Hundreds, if not more. It could be more than that. Hundreds of probably 3-node clusters where you're paying for the licensing fee if you're using EKS or something like that. And you're also paying for the hardware behind it, right? So if you're running your own even, you're still doing, like either 1 to 3 node clusters so that users can either have HA if they need to test that, or they can at least have something they can interact with. And I mean, that gets expensive. It's very expensive, especially if everybody keeps asking for one. In the beginning, you're probably just going to hand them out. Like, you don't need justification. You're just be like, yeah, sure, we're getting into Kubernetes. Let's get our users learning it, just because the value of learning how to use Kubernetes is so high. But then once you have developers, on a team where you got a team of 10 of them and they have 10 different clusters, I mean, that could be like, $5,000, $10,000 more a month that you're spending on just these clusters that maybe aren't being used, or actually maybe they're being used very minimally and they don't really have a need for them. They could either work out of namespaces, or like I said, you could go use clusters instead. All right, so what are you looking at for that? You're looking at, $876 cluster fee times 100 clusters, and you're looking at that platform stack made multiple times, right? So for the platform engineering team, that's even worse, because what are they doing? They're spending all this time and money, managing a cert manager across 100 clusters, and it's a different version every time. And they have to make sure that it's the newest version or an updated version. And maybe the developer doesn't want another version because they haven't tested with the newer version. Right? So it's very, very complicated for the user and for the platform team to keep all this stuff up to date. Whereas if you could just manage that stuff on a single cluster and then share it up to your developers, that's going to be a lot easier. And if they need to install their own version, they still can, because they have their own API. So, with vCluster, what you're going to do is, instead of using these 3 clusters, you're going to have a single multi-tenant cluster, and you're going to have the tenant workloads running in the virtual cluster. And then you can share up Cert Manager, right? You can share up your Nginx ingress controller or whatever else you're using, so that the users aren't deploying it again. Because realistically, all they need to do is go into their virtual cluster, make sure the virtual cluster has been created with syncing so that they can sync resources down. And then once those resources are synced, the base cluster will go ahead and take over and create those resources for you, right? So you don't actually have all this stuff running in a hypervisor or anything up above. It's still running on the base Kubernetes cluster, which means that you're not losing any performance. You're not running into issues with multiple hypervisors or stuff like that. Which means you can also run a vCluster and a vCluster and a vCluster, because at the end of the day, it just gets synced down to the base cluster and it's running there. So if you're using Kubernetes, it might be time to try vCluster this year. So virtual clusters are a Kubernetes concept that enables isolated clusters to be run within a single physical Kubernetes cluster, right? All right, yeah, and if anybody has questions, like, I'm here for Q&A and stuff too. I'm just presenting now to kind of give the information in the background of, vCluster. But if you got questions about vCluster, you got questions about Loft, let me know, and I'll answer them in there. But like I said too, if you don't want to ask them live, you can ask them in the comments or join Slack and ask them there. I'm Mike Petersen on Slack, so you can reach out to me if you have questions, or post them in the vCluster channel, which you'll probably get a quicker response, especially if it's during the evening time for me and I'm not actually here. All right, so sleep mode, reduce idle workloads cost by putting clusters to sleep when not in use. So what does this do? This is basically the scale to like 0 type deal, right? So if you've got users or developers who have a virtual cluster that they've stood up and they're not actually doing anything on it, like they just have it stood up, and then maybe they deploy like one thing, and then, or they didn't deploy anything. You gave it to them and they're like, hey, I need this now, I need it immediately. And you deployed a virtual cluster for them and they do nothing with it. Like absolutely nothing, because they get something else that comes up they have to work on, and maybe they don't have time to work with Kubernetes, or they're just learning about it and they're still reading documentation and they don't actually deploy anything. Well, this will put it to sleep, right? So it'll scale it to 0. None of the stuff will be running, so you don't have all these clusters running that aren't actually being used and causing you to think about how many worker nodes I have and how do I scale out. And the shared platform stack, like I was talking about previously, you run fewer duplicates of tools like Istio, Cert Manager, OPA, Datadog, and Vault, and more than that, right? So if you're already running this stuff, you can be running it in the base cluster and then sharing it up with your users, so you only have a single version of it running. And then they also, since they have their own API, they can install their own. And then multi-tenant cluster. So running fewer clusters by isolating multiple tenant workloads within a single cluster. So you can get, some real cost savings. Sleep mode is one of our, enterprise features and stuff. But for the most part, even if you're not using the enterprise features, you can still get cost savings for this because you're running stuff on the same cluster. So if you're using the open source, you're still going to save money, right? You're going to be able to deploy this, and your users, especially if they're running super simple applications that they just want to deploy with Ingress and then test it out, I mean, like there's no reason to give them an entire cluster. Just give them a virtual cluster, they can deploy it and then use your ingress that you're already using. So it's easy to shift into virtual clusters as well, right? So if you're using Helm, if you're using any of that stuff, basically you can just keep using it. You're just changing where you're pointing to, because this is a certified Kubernetes distribution, and you can run different versions of Kubernetes on this and different versions of virtual clusters, right? So you can run a version of Kubernetes that is not one-to-one with the base cluster. You can try a newer version of Kubernetes when it comes out and test on it. You can try an older version of Kubernetes and test on it if you need to. Say you want to test a migration, you can test all that stuff, right? So instead of upgrading the base cluster to the newest version of Kubernetes to see if your specs and all that are correct, what you can do is you can install a virtual cluster with a newer version and then try your application and see if anything's changed to where you need to update your YAML, right? So it's easier to test that way. So basically you can use the same tools, super easy. And then transform, your Kubernetes strategy throughout the software lifecycle. So basically you can empower developers with self-service Kubernetes. You can accelerate CI/CD with ephemeral Kubernetes environments. Elevate your ISV offering with a dedicated cluster per customer. We got all of these awesome, it's like, what does this mean? What does any of this mean? Build a managed Kubernetes service with best-in-class COGS. So you empower your developers by letting them deploy their own clusters, right? So with the UI, you can manage it and go in. You don't give them access to the EKS cluster itself. What you do is you basically give them access to vCluster platform. And then they don't need all of the stuff that goes into managing their IAM on AWS. Now, you can also sync that stuff. So if you're setting that up and you have requirements for it, you can use that stuff. But this also makes it easier to where you don't have to. And then you can accelerate CI/CD with ephemeral Kubernetes clusters. Well, they come up faster, right? So if you're deploying a regular Kubernetes cluster, it's going to take minutes to maybe an hour, right? Like it depends on how long and how busy stuff is in the cloud service that you're using, or how long it takes you to actually provision it if you're doing it like on-prem. But basically, instead of waiting that 20 to 30 to 40 minutes for this environment to come up, you just create an ephemeral Kubernetes cluster with vCluster, and it's up within like a minute. And then you can deploy to it and delete it, and you don't have to worry about installing a bunch of like extra stuff into the base cluster API. And then some of our customers are using it for different things, right? Like they're using it to reduce Kubernetes costs. Some of them are using it for self-service clusters, and some of them are using it for multi-tenancy for production apps, right? You can use it for SaaS and all that stuff too. Let's get through some of this, and then I guess what we'll do is we can hop over and look at what the vCluster UI looks like. But this is office hours, so like if you have questions about OSS, if you have questions about platform, feel free to post them in there. I'm just going to go through a little bit more stuff, and we'll see if we get a bigger audience that wants to ask some questions. But yeah, if you don't want to ask questions, like I said, ask them in Slack. But I think the next office hours we'll probably have actually on a webinar like style, so like a Zoom thing, so you can actually kind of log in and ask there. But we'll send it out a little bit earlier than a couple days before or a day before it is happening. This is just kind of replacing the demo that we usually do every week with some more content. I can actually kind of show what I'm working on now. So the next thing that I'm going to actually putting out for a video is going to be related to preview environments, right? So I'm using all these GitHub actions. I'm trying to automate the creation of a virtual cluster within the vCluster platform when a new PR comes up, and it's either labeled with a certain label. So this one, when I label it with preview, what it'll do is it'll create the preview environment. It'll go through and it'll run all this stuff, right? So it's using the setup for vCluster. It's deploying a certain version of the vCluster CLI, and then what it'll do is it'll create a virtual cluster with the vCluster platform create, and then it'll actually even add some of the links in here so that you can actually see what the PR is in GitHub. It'll give you a link with the preview environment, and then it'll also give you where it is running in Argo CD. What I'm doing with most of this stuff, though, is I'm doing it all on-prem. So I've got a wildcard set up for a domain locally, and then anything I create, I can just kind of hit locally. And then I've got an ingress controller running on a specific IP address locally so that I can access it. But our docs have these ones, which the next video is going to be more about this. So the next video is going to start talking about how to do a setup of an environment, and then just deploy something simple like adding Argo and deploying Argo, and then being able to access Argo. But we'll be talking about some GitHub actions, and this is the simple one. This is going to be a little bit more complicated one that I'm actually going to set up, which is going to deploy an application itself. But we'll do a first video kind of talking about what's in the docs and how to set that up. And then I'll also provide examples and stuff like that on our GitHub. Let's see. So we basically have examples under this repository. Let me bring it up. We got a bunch of examples here that are all from the videos and stuff that we've created on YouTube. So if you see any of the videos like Metal LB or any of those other things, it'll be in there. Cool. All right. So this is the platform UI, right? I've got some virtual clusters running. We've recently added, cost control. And what cost control is going to do is give you an idea of how much you've spent on the virtual clusters, how much you can save, and then how much you've actually saved with vCluster, right? So this is all running on-prem, and I'm just kind of showing off, I'm basically collecting data so I can have a little bit better graph of stuff that's running. I'm not running a ton of stuff, but it gives me an idea of how much I can save because I can come up here and I can, say how much it's worth. How much is a vCPU worth a month? How much is a gig of RAM worth? And how much is the control plane worth? And this is a good way to kind of keep an idea of how much, different teams and stuff are spending too, right? So if you come over here to the project and you set up different projects, you can see how much people are spending, how much they're saving by not actually deploying somewhere else like EKS or something like that, or their own cluster completely. And you can kind of keep an idea maybe eventually for like chargeback and that. But something brand new that kind of came out right before the end of the year. Expect more to get added to this to kind of help with like visualizing how much you're saving and how much you could save, right? Like I don't have autoscaler or anything set up on this, but you could, have autoscaler and get a little bit more information, and you can drill down into all this stuff and kind of see what's going on, right? Like which actual virtual cluster is being, has savings from like sleep mode, how long it's been asleep, and how much your users are actually using, which can be super helpful if you're trying to figure out spend for the year and how much each team, should be, how much each team is actually taking away from your budget for like how much they're spending per. I mean, like I said, chargeback, you got charge codes and stuff like that too. What else is kind of new? But obviously you can drill down into anything that's like, sleeping already, and you can kind of see information about it, and you can like bring it back up. See, we've got the single cluster that I'm running on now. Like I said, I'm running on-prem, so I'm not actually running anything crazy. I've just got a 3-node K3S cluster. So like my savings is based off of the numbers that I put in there. But if you have any questions about vCluster, like I said, ask them again, ask them in the comments. Let's go ahead and check out some of the docs, right? So our docs have been updated frequently, like they're getting better and better and better. If you're getting started with vCluster, what you want to do is start out with this open source vCluster instead of vCluster platform, because you want to learn how to use vCluster first. vCluster platform makes it easier, but you get a 14-day free trial with that. So you kind of want to get some of the concepts and stuff down before you jump into the platform. That way you can use it immediately and set up a POC or do whatever demos and stuff you want to do for your users internally. vCluster is a lot easier to configure and set up now because we've got the vCluster YAML, and we've got all these options and sections that you can actually configure and set up, like set up ingress and all that stuff. Some of the stuff was configurable a little bit differently before, but we've added it all into the vCluster YAML instead of the values file. Right? So like if you look at an example, and you want to see what a vCluster YAML looks like now, this is a very basic vCluster YAML. That what this is going to do is it is going to set up ingress for the API access to the virtual cluster. And then what it's going to also do is it will set up ingress classes to be synced from the host cluster to the virtual cluster. And then it'll also sync up the ability to create a ingress in the virtual cluster that will sync to the host cluster, and it'll use the ingress on that host cluster. I don't know. Some people in here, have you used vCluster? Do you have questions about vCluster? Like, are you just getting started with vCluster, or you just heard about it, or are you using it for a while and you have questions, or like maybe a little bit more advanced questions that you're trying to figure out, right? Just let me know. You post in the chat, and should be able to answer it. But anyways, I would say starting out with vCluster, come here, right? Come to this. Latest version is 0.22. Oh yeah, let me bring up another link too. This is where you want to actually follow if you want to see what new is coming up with vCluster. And it's going to be the changelog. So let me bring the changelog up. And this will actually kind of give you information and let you follow along with like what's updated, what's happening with the newer versions of vCluster, right? Like on the 18th, we released 4.2, and that has like the cost control stuff. And it talks about like, what you can do with the cost control and how to enable the cost dashboard. On the 12th, we released 4.1. We're doing more frequent releases than we did previously, right? Like we're adding features instead of waiting for like some big updates. That way we can get more features out so that you can use them. So if there's features that you're looking for that aren't quite in there yet, maybe let us know. Let us know what you're looking for, right? Like, and then we can kind of build something like that external database connector, right? So instead of just using SQLite for the vCluster or using etcd or something like that, you can go ahead and you can use an external like MySQL database if you've already got that, in AWS and you want to manage it on the cluster itself. So follow the changelog. Let me actually put this in the chat. There we go. Yeah, follow the changelog, and that's how you're going to keep up to date with vCluster. We're going to have more, we're going to have more office hours and stuff like that. Hey, thanks, Carlos. Yeah. I shaved it a little bit longer, and then, I asked my wife to clean up the back, and I didn't put anything on the blade, and she went up thinking that she wanted me to, I wanted her to just clean up a little bit. So it's a little bit shorter than I was hoping to get, but, at least it's like right at the end of the holidays, and it's had a little bit of a chance to kind of grow out. But thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. But yeah, if anyone has questions, let me know. I'm going to keep on just talking about vCluster stuff. But like I said, this is just our first office hours of the year. We're going to keep doing more of these. I'll make it a little bit more structured and stuff for the next one. I was just hoping to answer a couple of questions from people that maybe had heard about vCluster and were just starting out using it this year and maybe wanted some direction. But yeah, the direction basically I have is start out with open source, get your application deployed, get vCluster deployed. When you first set up when you do your first deployment, you're probably going to just use port forwarding. Maybe that's not what you're going to want for your users eventually. So what you're going to learn how to do is set up, ingress and all that so that you can actually access the API. Yeah, it was right at the back. It was right up the back. She cut it. Like I bought one of the new wall peanuts. So I was like, I've been doing the thing where I'm going to, buy it for life and looking for things that I can buy that are going to last, because it's kind of annoying to buy something and it just goes away or it breaks or something like that. So I had been using a razor with a battery in it. Yeah, you wear a hat. Like I usually wear a hat, right? But I haven't been wearing a hat as much now. Like I've got a Timbers hat. I don't watch, sports that much. I'm nerdier. I like watching, playing card games and like TCGs and stuff like Magic, but the game I'm playing now is called Flesh and Blood. So I wear this Timbers hat usually, but people will ask you questions and talk to you out of nowhere from random places that you don't want to talk to you about it. So I'm trying to just find like a nice New Era hat that's not associated with any teams. But yeah, same thing. I said, can you clean up the back? And she just went straight up. One of the new wall peanuts that I was trying out. And I was just trying to shave a little bit. And then I shaved my head because I was excited because I got this new thing. And yeah, she ended up cutting it too short. So I shaved it basically all the way down, which I haven't done in a while. I usually try to keep it a little bit longer. But I guess the benefit for you too, and for me, is that at least it's now all even and I don't have, hair hanging down over my ear or anything like that. Live streams, right? Like I can talk about anything. But basically, yeah, you're going to start out with like the open source vCluster. And then once you move on from there, what you'll do is try platform, right? So get used to using this. Like all the features in here will basically get you, 90% of the way there if you're doing enterprise stuff. If you're doing enterprise stuff, you might have some other requirements, like you need support. You need to be able to have a dedicated control plane instead of having all of these workloads running on the worker nodes. Like if you had all that stuff going on, then you're going to want some of the pro stuff, and you can see what's different. You can see what's pro versus what's open source with this pro tag. Like for the most part, most of the stuff you're going to need is going to be open source. And then, like I said, yeah, if you want some enterprise stuff, talk to us and we can give you some pricing and information about that, and you'll get like the UI. Different binary for pro. It's now all of the images are based off of pro. Yeah, okay, so all of the stuff's based off of pro now. So basically, like if you're using the OSS, you're getting the same image, which is the chain guard image, which I think before it was Alpine. So all this stuff is in there. It's just not the pro tag stuff isn't enabled unless you have a license. So you try to deploy something with the pro, it's gonna say, hey, you need a license for that. But everything that's not pro, you're gonna be able to use. So like say you migrate from OSS to the pro version, you're just gonna use the same image, right? And then the pro stuff, the difference between some of the pro 2 is once you go to the platform, everything is a CRD, whereas everything in open source is a Helm chart. So same Helm chart for basically everything if you're doing open source. And then if you move to pro, what it's going to be is a CRD with the same YAML that you're using from that basically vCluster YAML configuration. You can copy it over. So what a regular like open source one looks like is this. Right, you've got the control plane, all that configuration, and then what the pro stuff looks like is going to be over here in the templates, and it's going to be like, let's do external database. Basically, you're just going to paste that vCluster YAML in here, but the resource itself is going to be this, right? So it's going to install all of these CRDs. Here, let me bring up a command line too. Oh, I guess the thing is I installed Ghosty, right? I don't use anything. I don't do anything. I've been using Terminal on Mac by itself, just base terminal for like 15, 20 years, however long, I switched over to Mac. now I'm using Ghosty, right? Like I'm not doing anything special with it. I'm sure everybody tried Ghosty or they're using Alacrity or something like that. But let's see, CRDs. So basically you're gonna have all these CRDs and stuff installed in the base cluster, and you're gonna be able to define stuff with the CRD, and you're gonna use the same vCluster YAML, and you're gonna put it into the section down here where it's gonna actually be values. So anything you do with open source is transferable to pro, and then kind of vice versa, right? Like except for some of the CRD stuff that you're adding around it, right? Like if I turn on sleep mode, then that's gonna give me a different configuration that is outside of the values file. Actually, no, sorry, it's in the values file. Yeah, so anything you're doing in open source, transferable. But then you can also configure some other stuff like, who owns it, where it's going to get set up and where it's going to get configured and all that stuff. All right, let me discard this. But everything in here that you see is going to be our CRD, right? Like, so you've got like virtual cluster instances, templates, users, teams. So you can automate all that stuff, which is pretty helpful actually when you're doing GitHub Actions and stuff like that, because you just throw a couple of things in your secrets, right? And then what you're doing is you're hitting your endpoint for your platform endpoint. So just hitting like this endpoint here, which for the most part, you're probably gonna have a custom domain. And then you're creating all of these resources and stuff using that instead of actually having to chart everything out. So makes it pretty easy, right? So it's Carlos, like, yeah, the next thing I'm gonna show off Carlos this week, like hopefully this week or in the next couple weeks too, multiple videos on how to do GitHub Actions and how to use that to actually deploy stuff for preview environments, which I know some of that stuff is actually in, I think Greg and stuff was doing that kind of stuff with, I don't know if you're doing that with Canoe or not, but similar idea, right? Like getting stuff created in Argo, having it sync to the repository, having it deploy to a virtual cluster that you're automating the creation of. That's what we're gonna show off. We're gonna show off how to automate creation of virtual clusters with GitHub Actions, and then how to deploy onto it. This one's just a very basic example, right? Like all it's do is it's installing Argo CD, and then one of the other ones that I was actually playing around with will put a link to the GitHub PR preview, and then tell you where Argo CD is, right? So you get the preview environment URL, and then you'll get Argo CD to see where that's actually running, and then a little bit more information about it, right? It'll send you a message with the output. That's what we're working on. Try to get a little bit more advanced in some of the videos and demos so that we can show off different use cases. So if you have ideas on different use cases you want to see, let me know. I'll start working on that. We have some customer use cases that we had our customer success and architects, like sales architects and sales engineers kind of come up with, what are customers trying to create? What are they doing? What are we showing off that's actually of value or interest to them? So that's some of the videos and stuff you should see over the next couple weeks and months and everything too, I think in the beginning of the year until we cover it. And then I'm also going to turn into a guide. So all this stuff's going to be a guide on our docs, possibly a blog as well, but we're trying to get as many guides as we can get with examples so that you can find the examples that you need and try to set it up and configure it on your own without trying to figure stuff out. Because our docs are, I've worked at a lot of places. I think our docs are pretty good. Obviously there's more that we can do with them, right? Because like what I'm basing this off of is going to be under integrations, and it's going to be, sorry, we got a platform. It's going to be under integrations, and it's going to be the GitHub Actions, right? So preview and on pull requests. Hey, our docs are pretty good in comparison to some of the stuff that's out there. We can do better, obviously. Everybody can do better, right? So the next video is going to be on like, how do I do this? And then we're going to build onto that. And then as we build onto that, that's going to get pushed back into our documentation. So, we're going to show how to do on pull requests and then just preview environments, but I'm going to go a little bit deeper and just show the application deployment and do the pretty green to blue or whatever in the application with the preview from the PR, right? So that's the future, right? Like, and then other stuff, like, so we have, we've made videos on Argo CD, Rancher. I haven't done anything on GitLab, so maybe we'll do GitLab later. HashiCorp, we kind of did some stuff about that, but that's not super advanced or hard enough that we might need a full video for someone to understand like how to actually use it. Carpenter would be interesting. I don't know what's the big thing. I don't know if you're still Carlos, maybe head out. What's the big thing this year, right? Like, I'm not going to be deploying like a Jupyter notebook and then just talking about AI, right? Like maybe on that. I guess maybe showing off some of the scaling down with workloads basically, and scaling down of worker nodes in real time or something like that. That might be interesting, but then I'm gonna have something that goes and creates a bunch of stuff to scale up and scale back down. But that's going to be using something like EKS, which love using EKS. I'll say that. But also a lot of the stuff that I demo out is actually on-prem. So I'm trying to show off on-prem stuff using MetaLB and just a K3S server. But also, I think that's the thing is, I don't know if everybody else is kind of like that, but working with cloud long enough, like I am so afraid of spending money. When I was at IBM, I spent so much money for our developer advocate team on managing our Kubernetes clusters. We had so many of them. Like that's why I say you're gonna have 100 clusters or something like that. Like you're gonna have a cluster per person previously before everybody was using Kind for everything and doing that. I'm so afraid of spending money that like I like to do everything on-prem. I've got this very old, not very, I say very old now, probably 10, 15-year-old Dell down there that's running. Oh, that's what I'm looking at. What's the best home lab? What is the best home lab computer to set up now? I was watching a video about a small like 10-inch rack. I've got a Synology and stuff for Plex and all that, but I'm looking at what can I switch to that's going to be maybe like a NUC or something like that. Like I don't need Mac Minis, although that might be actually pretty nice too. I just need something that's a little bit less power hungry than a Dell, 360, DL360 or something like that I can have running all the time. That's not going to be super loud or anything like that. Right now I've got it running in my garage, so it's not too crazy, but I want something that uses a little bit less power, right? What are y'all running on? Like, what do people use locally for their setup? I know, Carlos, you're probably just using KS, right? Because you have access to AWS and you can just deploy something. But right now I'm using, what am I using? Proxmox, and then I'm using a plugin. And when I do a configuration setup, I use Terraform to create the VMs. And then I use Ansible to go ahead and deploy the K3S, right? So that's what I'm doing right now. Just for all this demo stuff's running there. That's what I use. But I'm sure people are using something else now. Like maybe they're using the new NUCs or they're using something else. I know one of the sales engineers is using Raspberry Pis, and he's got a little Pi cluster running, and he got one of the M.2 hats. So it's probably super fast. Although the memory is going to be very low, right? Like you got 8 gigs of memory per. So I don't know if I want more than that. Whereas my machine has got like, I think 70 gigs of memory. And then I changed out the 10,000 RPM. I think it's 10,000 RPM was drives I had in there into solid states, and it's actually sped it up a bit. I don't know. That's about it. I'm gonna work on a new home lab, I think, here this year. Hopefully, we'll see. And then hopefully do some more stuff with like cloud and kind of show that off. But basically, what I need to know is what do people in the community want to see? What kind of demos are they running? What are the workloads that they're trying to run that they're having issues with? I guess we should make a video too about using Kubernetes or using a virtual cluster and the NVIDIA driver now to get access to a GPU. But then I need to set up maybe my, that's why I need to upgrade my gaming computer so that I can set up and use that old 1080 Ti and see if I can actually do anything with that for some AI/ML. But I don't know. So I've got a Mac Studio and stuff, which I haven't really played around with that much for that. I mean, I've done some of the image playground and everything, but it's not really what we're looking to kind of show off. All right, yeah. Now that I've rambled about all that, start out with vCluster OSS, right? Like get used to using the vCluster YAML. When you've done that and you've got your virtual clusters deployed and you've got your applications deployed, head over to the vCluster platform, and that's going to give you the UI and all the visualizations and stuff like that, so you can use that. But got about 30 minutes. I think that's pretty good. We don't have a ton of questions. I'll try to. For the next one of these, I will advertise it a little bit more and give people a little bit more time to come in. And then I might also ask, what's the best day and time for this that people would want to join in. I mean, maybe if someone wants to demo or show something off that they're doing, that'd be super interesting too, right? So we can show off what people are doing in the community. Usually we do that with webinars, but if you're just doing something open source completely and you want to show that off, maybe we can show that off. But Happy New Year. Happy first week back for many people. I hope everyone enjoyed the stream or at least got something helpful or useful out of it. Let me know what your configuration is for Ghosty if you're using that. My configuration, as you saw, is very, very simple. Very simple. See, what do I even have? Right, like I sent someone my configuration and they asked me if I was blind because I have, such a large font size. No, it's so you can actually see stuff on videos, but let me know what your Ghosty setup is, right? Like I think that's the biggest thing this year everyone's talking about. And let me know what I can do to actually make it look better, right? Like I'm gonna try to use it for demos and make it look a little bit better than just the base terminal, but I don't know. All right, see everybody next time. Like I should have a video out in the next day or two talking about how to do the GitHub actions and create a virtual cluster. If not a very simple video to begin with, we will build on to that by deploying applications and showing, more complicated stuff like, hey, how do I How do I update a template in vCluster platform using this instead of going in and doing it by hand every time? How do I update, maybe my teams or users? Like maybe you want to do everything through GitOps and you don't want to manage stuff manually, right? Like some customers are doing that. Some customers are just using it and then updating it through the UI. But thanks for joining, everybody. And like I said, if you have any questions after this video stream is over, just go ahead and post them in the comments, and I keep an eye on that and I should be able to answer them. Or if you want like a faster answer and real time, join our Slack and check it out in there and let us know. But yeah, thanks for joining, everyone. Let me go ahead and do this outro video, which is super cool that Pablo made, and I will see you next time.